How do you make your story come alive? On a piece of paper, or 2 or 3 pages. When it comes to your entire life, your entire professional life is sitting on a couple pieces of paper. And so, how many pieces of paper do you have to have? Is 1? People tell you to scrunch it into 1? Is 2 the right number? What is the right number of pages? However many it takes to tell your story.
1.
And that's the answer. Is really how many does it take? Because I've had people say, well, it has to be on 1. It has to be on 2. It can't be more than 3. I get a little antsy when it gets over 3. But that's because it gets a little long. I will tell you whatever it takes for your story to be told, where people will continue and want to continue to read from page 1 until it ends. You have to write it in a way that someone wants to continue reading. That's what's most important about this thing. So when you're talking about an objective, your resumes have to have an objective.
Don't they obviously know your objective if you're applying for a job?
But yet the majority, the point that was made was, well, isn't it a little obvious what the objective is? If you're applying for the job? Yes, you've just made my point. Because I've seen far too many resumes that have an objective that says, I am applying for your job and I really, really, really want it. That's my objective. And my response, no kidding. If someone puts in the paper, there's a sales job that's available, and you put in your objective, I am looking to apply for your sales job, I'm going to say no kidding to you. When it came to an objective, and where it really hit home for me, is when I was looking at resumes, and the objective came out, and said, I will work like a dog for peanuts. And I said, huh. No better or worse than any other objective that's out there. I went home and my wife said, tell him he's barking up the wrong tree. But think about that. We'll work like a dog for peanuts. It's not any better or worse. So now let's go back to how many pages do you need, and do you need an objective? And the answer is whatever your preference. Is there a right or a wrong way that a resume has to be written? Should you use bullets or should you use a paragraph? You say bullets?
My personal preference is bullets, and I have a personal preference for standard margins.
Okay.
And a lot of people like technical writers and English readers, that sort of thing, prefer the simple standard margins.
Okay, so standard margins. I will tell you, use whatever you want, but be consistent with yourself. Don't have bullets in one section of it and then paragraphs in another when you're talking about job responsibilities. You just have to be consistent amongst yourself. There is no right or wrong way to write resumes. And I will tell you, because of the document I sent you, if you go all the way to the back, there is several links on different websites relating to writing resumes. And I went in and I looked at every one of those, and every one of the recommendations is different. They all look different. Every resume you read is different. Good. That should tell you, right off the bat, don't be so hard on yourself. Make sure you go in and you say, is this story coming alive? And we're going to talk about how to bring your story alive when it comes to the resume. But be consistent with yourself is a key point. And stop worrying about what every one of the so-called experts is telling you, including me. Because my resume is only as good as I think that it is. and all the feedback that I've received in the writing of this thing over the many years. But one of the things I will tell you, how many of you right now have a resume if someone says, I need it now? You can't make a change to it. You have to hit send right this second. You'd be able to do that. If your hand is not up, when you walk out of here, set up a time sometime within the next day or two and make sure that your resume is ready to go. Because you will be surprised the number of potential times that how powerful that message can be when someone calls up and says, that's interesting, I didn't realize you had that background, you have a resume ready. I was networking with someone. I had available positions at the time. And they said, hey, I've got this background. I said, well, that sounds interesting. I'd love to be able to see your resume. And they said, oh, yeah, sure, I'll be glad to send that to you. I got it 48 hours later. What's that telling me? They had to put it together. So it gets me thinking, someone who could potentially hire that person, are they on the ball? Do they have things on the ready? You should have this thing ready to pull off your shelf at any given moment. It doesn't mean every single day you go home and you update your resume. But what it does mean is you go home and you have a quarterly appointment reoccurring on your calendar that pops up and says, update your resume on a quarterly basis. Every quarter this thing pops up. I've been working on this thing for 8 years. This is when I originally wrote this version. And for 8 years, my resume has been going through on a quarterly basis a change. And you go through and you read it. And you treat it every quarter differently. Because don't just read it online every quarter and say, oh, that looks pretty good. Print it one quarter. Read it backwards one quarter. Why would I say read it backwards?
Your oldest stuff is last.
Your oldest stuff is last. Probably stuff you haven't seen as much as the fresher stuff that's on there. A different perspective. You're looking for a different perspective. You're looking at this and you've seen it so many times you're unable to edit it. It is impossible for the writer to edit their own work. No matter how hard we think, because your mind is actually reading the words that came out of your head, not necessarily that's on paper. Which leads me to the next point of share it with anyone and everyone you want to see it, and share it with anyone and everyone who doesn't want to see it. Share it. Sometimes we hold our resumes so close to the heart because we're not sure we want to share it out there. Share. Share the resume with everyone for a variety of reasons. One, for editing. Have them go over it with a fine-tooth comb. Have them offer their opinions on what they think can be better about this resume. Grow some pretty thick skin. Get very used to people giving you feedback on it because it's only going to strengthen it, and this thing could be the difference on whether you get an interview or not. So have other people take a look at it. The other part is for networking purposes. I gave all of you my resume. I hope you guys see maybe I'm qualified for something. And if I think of you because I've aligned it to the resume that was given to me, maybe I can say, hey, I saw someone with a resume like that, and you can send it on. I keep every resume that's ever been sent to me. I have a resume folder, and I go in and I periodically check to see if there's anything that I can connect with that person. I hope others are out there and do that. That we don't just, when someone says I keep your resume on file, I actually do. I'm hoping others do that as well. Because with email today, your resume can get around and can get around very quickly. That's a good thing for you. A resume is bringing your story alive. A resume is making sure that you're making the connections and letting it do some of the work for you. It is marketing. It is sales. Make sure that your resume is part of a marketing tool for you. So when it comes to writing the resume, and you're looking at this thing and updating it on a quarterly basis, I also want you to realize, and you're differentiating how you're editing this thing and looking at it, and you're handing it out, and you're making changes to it. Spell check does not constitute editing. Just look at the word manger. can't just run spell check and consider it done. You have to go in. I print it periodically versus looking at it online because I read it differently. I found something on it today I want to change. Last quarter, I found a typo that had been sitting there for probably 8 years. Now, it was only a little period in a bullet, but I was inconsistent in how I applied that period to the other bullets that were out there. It is a typo. Would anyone have noticed it? I don't know. But you're going to find things on here every single quarter. Just get a thick skin when you do it. So you're sharing it, you're editing it, you're spell checking it. When I get a resume to look at, what is the first thing that I do when I'm reading someone else's resume? What's the first thing that I do?
Check the qualifications, see if they have listed anything that you're looking for.
Okay, look for qualifications and alignment.
Read their name.
Read their name.
See when they're available.
See when they're available.
If they're presently working.
Okay.
See if it's in the proper English.
Okay, get closer.
Spell check.
Spell check. I do run spell check. I don't read it. I don't bother reading it at all. The first time through, I'm looking at it. I'm looking for things that will stick out to me. Name is one of those. Not because of the name itself, but where I hire a Jane and not a John. But I'm looking to see, is it visually pleasing to me? Is there space? When it comes to writing resumes, space is part of the marketing of this thing. If you jam it through, if you jam everything together, your words, your sentences, your highlights, your bolding, and it all just looks the same. I looked at a resume last week, and it was simply a set of about 100 bullets. That's all that I remember of this resume. It was just a set of bullets sitting in front of me. That's what I remember about it. I don't remember the name. I don't remember their qualifications. I don't remember what they were applying for. I don't remember anything on it, except a bunch of bullets. You want to be able to see some things that allow this thing to flow. So when you're doing your jobs on the phones, for those that are on the phones, we say get to know the customer. You get to know the customer because you have certain screens on the computer that you look at. You have certain things that you're looking for. If you're in collections, when's the last payment that they had? How far have they ever been delinquent in the past? You're seeing these types of things, but they stick out. It's almost as if they're bolded and hanging out to you because you've seen it so many times. Your resume should be this thing that sticks out. So it doesn't mean all the font should be in bold, and shouldn't be all the font is this big, but you should do some things that will allow it to stick out as necessary. So a good example would be your name might be a little bit bigger in font or bolded. It might be your dates are swung over to the right. So if all of my dates are over to the right, someone who's looking at this thing and looking for resume things to stick out for you, what do these dates do for me?
It's in perspective, kind of where you were.
Now, your story of your flow, and the point was made in the back that said, I want to see if you're currently employed. I want to see if you have any gaps in your employment. I want to see if you had many jobs or just one job. This allows me to do that very easily because now the dates stick out like a sore thumb, and I can do that picture for you. And now your story is starting to come alive because now I'm putting a fluidity, there's a continuum now based off of where you've been and when you've been. So when it comes to dates, what is the best format for dates? The year? Is a year good enough? So from 2010 to 2011 I worked?
No, month and year.
Month and year. Why would you put month and year?
Yeah, I worked for a whole year.
So some people do it just out of laziness. Some people do it because they have had a gap that's out there and they really don't want it to stick out like a sore thumb. I will tell you to include your months, would be my recommendation. And the reason I would say that is it shows that you're detail-oriented and shows really that you're not trying to hide anything. But there might be some gaps out there. Maybe you were out, you had a 5-year gap because you had your kids and you wanted to see them grow up. What's wrong with that?
Is that something, not that I do, but is that something you would write in there, why there's a gap? Is that anything you can put on there?
I would. I would put on there. Yes.
For like that 5-year gap, could you be creative and put from January whatever to whatever, stay-at-home mom, or some sort of CEO of my household or something like that?
Household CEO.
Right, you know, to like make it creative, or would you suggest not to do that?
When it comes to, and I'm glad you asked the question, and feel free at any point to ask these types of questions. This is the Q&A portion of the program. I want to make sure you get your questions answered. I'm going to define creative. Creative needs to be creative but accurate. I will tell you at no point to stretch anybody's truth on anybody's resume. Tell the truth. Put the facts on here and let the facts say something. Now, there is a difference between janitor and sanitary engineer. It's still a fact, and you're just boosting up the language that you're using, but it's still a fact. Look at how many people in the news today are losing their jobs because there is a lie on their resume. Just ask the former Yahoo CEO. And there was a recent one in the news yesterday of somebody who lied on their resume. This is about facts. So yes, I would get creative, but let me give you an example of someone who was without a job for a couple of years. And I saw their resume. I would have never known they were out of work until they told me in a one-on-one. Their resume, they had done a lot of work when it comes to volunteer activity. They had done some things on setting some speakers up for these foundations they were working for. So it's not relevant whether you got paid for the job or not. It is about roles and responsibilities. So we laugh when we say put in household CEO, but did you volunteer during that time? Or if there really is just an explanation of you stayed home with the kids, maybe you put an asterisk during that date and then you can put something else on the bottom. In an interview, can I ask you, do you have kids?
No.
Can I ask you, do you have a car? Can I ask you personal questions?
No.
Is there anything keeping me, the writer of that resume or application, from writing that in myself?
No.
If it is going to strengthen my cause, why not? Go to my resume and go to the bottom paragraph on page 3, the bottom section. What's it say?
Personal.
Have you ever seen that before?
I put it on mine.
Okay, good. Have you seen a lot of this?
No.
Does it stick out? Does it differentiate me?
Absolutely.
It's one of the things I'm bringing your story alive. Make your story come alive by differentiating yourself from everyone else who's doing that. So if you're looking at the majority of resumes that are out there, put a name in the middle. I swung mine over to the left. On the front page of my resume in the upper right-hand corner, what do I have?
Online information.
Okay, so I have some online information that's out there that you can see my website, or you can go to my National Speakers Association biography. What I'm doing here is, as the times have changed, the Times are saying that a lot of these resumes are being sent online or being viewed online. So there's an opportunity for you to either just click on it, and now there's more of a story being told about me. Or someone can then figure out where the website is and go to the National Speakers Association website and find me there. So it's saying, hey, that's okay, find out more about who I am, because that's who my story is. But on the personal front here, you can't ask me if I have kids. You can't ask me if I'm married. You can't even ask me if I like to go running. But now, look at that last piece again and start telling the story about who I am. What is this thing telling you about who I am?
Just what you do in your spare time.
Okay, but let's bring a story to this thing.
Family-oriented,
So it says I'm detailed. It says what?
family-oriented.
Family oriented. Okay.
You're reliable, you have self, what do you call it? You regulate yourself.
Okay, so balance. So I can effectively balance between family and work. Is that a skill worth having? Absolutely. What else?
That's what it's going to say.
Okay.
You're healthy.
I'm healthy.
We're not requiring X dollars for the salary, like you can, or medical benefits.
I'm negotiable. I'm willing to have a conversation, but also that's telling you that I'm worth something. It's telling you that I will work for what I am worth. I am willing to have this conversation with you because that salary isn't as important to me as the satisfaction of the job. In the salary, I'll get paid what I'm worth.
And that always the salary part is more than personal?
You can put it, a lot of people end with it. And I always have debates with myself if I even want it in there. How much of, I mean, that almost becomes an obvious piece. But some people are not negotiable with their salary. They said, if this is a salary, that's it. It may not meet my personal needs. I mean, I had 3 girls and 1 bathroom in my house. I've got to add on at some point. But what else?
I kind of took it as like irrelevant to kind of the job because it doesn't really mean it's your personal life. And if you have 2 individuals with 2 resumes, that second individual, you can't ask them about that. So how would you compare to it? And it kind of says, I feel like I kind of take it as it's irrelevant, like it's your personal life. They want to focus on like your work history and like they want to see that and like the things that we talked about in the personal piece. We want to see that in the other places in the resume. I guess is what
Because I'm not allowed to ask you these questions, what I am telling you here is that, at least on paper, I'm stable. It means I'm flexible. It means I can effectively balance between work and home. My work's not going to be affected by stuff going on outside of work. It's going to be that I'm willing, that I've found some extracurricular activities that are out there, and I found the time to write a couple books, and that I'm healthy. I don't have to ask any questions about that. I've put some thoughts in the jury's mind. We don't need to have that conversation because now it says that, yes.
Since it says that there, can they ask you in your interview, can they touch on that?
They still can't ask me, however, they could say, hey, I see you like running. Now that's not,
Open it
that's
up.
not, yeah, so if they, and then we start to have a dialogue about it, it's a whole different story. But legally, I can't ask you a question of how are you going to get to work today? Are you married? Because it's not relevant to the job. However, things that are not relevant to the job in reality are relevant to the job if you make them. And we'll talk about that in a few weeks in the interviewing section. But it's about letting your story come alive. So if someone's reading this, I don't have to wait for the interview for them to get a picture of who I am. Hopefully they're getting a picture of who I am, of someone who hasn't missed a whole lot of days of work. They're going to come in every single day. Hopefully they're healthy, they're stable, they're going to work extremely hard for me. And that's pretty cool. That's what I'm getting at.
I looked at it differently. I looked at, you've got bonus points that someone else didn't get.
So I differentiated myself just a little
And if they're
bit.
looking into that kind of
everyone.
situation, and then, they're going back and forth this way, the other person they interviewed is coming in coughing and gagging, looking through a smoke and saying, and you know what, that's all they're looking at. There's so much the same. This may put you to the top.
Competition is tight, gang. Competition is very tight. And when you're even with someone else, someone's going to ask the question, what is going to differentiate you from someone else who is out there? So how many different resumes should you have? Do you think this is my only one?
Probably not.
Okay.
Yes.
Who said yes?
I would say you only need one, really, as long as it's tight, right? As long as it's tight and it's good and you, why do you need 2?
I was just guessing.
You have to have. Now, I will tell you, you want to have a fluid document, which means that you have to be willing to change with the times. You need to make sure that this thing is evolving with you. That as you're changing, this thing's evolving along with you. As the business is changing, as terminology is changing, as business models are changing, that you're changing along with it. And a good example of that would be risk management. We never talked about risk years ago. But being in a financial industry, it's all about risk mitigation. It's all about risk control frameworks. It's all about risk models. It's all about that stuff. So you might have to change your language to reflect some of that and have this thing evolving. But I will tell you is make sure that your language that you write in there is consistent with what someone on the street would understand. Not someone down the hall, someone down the street. And so if you are second liens specialist number 2, means nothing to me. But if you're a collector of mortgage loans, now it resonates with me. Now I understand. In layman's terms, can someone understand the language that's on here? So a lot of times I've seen far too many people that have specialized resumes. Here's one for sales positions. Here's one for collections experience. Here's one for accounting and finance, and they try to separate it. That's only increasing your risk of making a mistake and finding a typo. Oh, I'm only going to change one line here. I'm only going to change 2 lines here. I've only changed 1 line and have a typo more often than writing an entire book. I tell you. You're going to have that typo because it's going to be quick and hit send, and you're not going to edit it, and you're not going to put yourself in the typical routine to check it. You have a risk of making mistakes. When you make that mistake, as soon as I see a typo on a resume, most of the time, I will put it to the side and I'm done. As with most people that do that, because it lacks attention to detail. The reason I say that is, when it comes to an interview, someone once explained to me, and I have the same thought when it comes to a resume. You have to treat a resume, or someone was an HR director was telling me this. He said, an interview is like a first date. I'm going to come into that interview dressed to the nines. I'm going to give you the best that I have. Because everything after that is going to go downhill. I mean, think about it. It's all downhill from there. So, if I'm giving you my best and my best is average, I'll tell you right now, if you ever interview with me and you're average, you're not in. Because if your average is your best, it's only going to go downhill from there. If you're handing me a resume that has typos on it, and you didn't bother to check it, I have questions immediately about it. So make sure that you're paying very close attention with this spell check. Does not count as editing. But I suggest you have one resume that you're not fiddling with on a regular basis. That you're not constantly changing, but use language that makes sense to people. Use language that is layman's term. Use language that is powerful. And what I mean by that is avoid support language. I participated in, assisted with, I was part of a team that completed blank. You want to use language that says, I initiated, I led, I owned. I was the program director, I was the lead, I executed. I was the one where someone says, you were the one who took the initiative and you were the one who drove this thing, you were the one who executed this, and it should become very obvious in the resume itself. Go through and check the bullets and find out how many times you said assisted or participated. It comes out more often than not. And when you start seeing that type of language, you start saying, you were along for the ride. So when you're telling your story that says I was along for the ride, now it just looks as resume filler to me. And now your story's starting to angle a little bit differently. I think there was a question in the back.
So what if, like I've been in the workforce for like 33 years.
Okay.
I started out at 19, running that work, just doing like this kind of stuff. started out like scheduling appointments for people, then working into the counseling people, then working into the program director. I don't remember the dates. What do I do with that? Of when that changed?
The question was, how far back do you go and how relevant is it to the work that you're doing right now?
Right.
I was a lifeguard for 3 years. That's not on my list. A, because I was a really bad lifeguard.
Did you kill someone?
But I mean, how
Well,
far?
I miss saving a few people. I'm just
How far back do you go, like, on employment, too?
Right.
Because, I mean, I've been here 12 years, so do I have to even put anything else?
That's where I'm moving.
Okay.
So I don't think that being a lifeguard is relevant to me. Now, if I decide to change what I wanted to do and start getting involved in a little bit more things that were first aid related, or I want to become an ambulance driver, sure, maybe I'd go back and put it on. But right now, it's really not relevant to my trajectory. So I took it off because it really doesn't have a whole lot of relevance. I worked at a bookstore for 3 weeks. That's not on there. But somebody asked me whether it's volunteer or whether it's working. You have to ask yourself, how relevant is it to you as a whole? Is it telling your story? I've had some people give me advice, or I've had people come in looking for advice who were told, if you worked at this company for 12 years, anything you did before this company is irrelevant, and I tell you that person is wrong. This is you as a whole. This is your story. This isn't your story with the current company you're in right now. This is your holistic story, end to end. So if you think that it's relevant, that you've been volunteering for this organization for 12 years and you've learned how to sell, you've learned how to negotiate, you've learned how to have tough conversations, you've learned how to care, whatever the volunteer activity is, include it. If it's past work experience and maybe what you did was filing, and yeah, that's not really relevant to who you are right now, I would include it. However, if it adds to your story of being an extremely organized person, absolutely put it on. I'll give you a good example. Because one of the things you want to include on there are the skills. The skills that you have. So you might want to say that you're proficient in Microsoft Excel, PowerPoint, Visio, those tools that are out there that help you, that are fairly well known. If you are going to put those skills down that are specific to this bank, avoid acronyms. Or when you do have the acronym, make sure that you have it spelled out and that someone can understand, in layman's terms, on the street, what you're talking about. So a system dealing with efficiency or a system dealing with staffing levels is what you want to put in layman's terms. In the past, were looking for analytic type jobs or reporting jobs. I would have things that would say proficient in Microsoft Excel. I currently don't have that on there anymore. I want to lead the efforts of people who are proficient with Excel. But I don't necessarily need that in my resume anymore, so I've removed it. So you have to determine where the relevancy is for all of that. Does that make sense? There's a question in the back.
Yeah, I just, your resume is very thorough, and I read through it. I'm just shocked just because of all of the guidance I've ever had on resumes. Like, I've never seen one this ever, and I've never been advised, which is very good and so much information, but how many resumes do you see there? Like, because I've seen like CEOs that are just one page, and they're 60 years old. So obviously they have a lot of background, but I've heard that from, in general, just you want to glance and be very concise, clear, to the point, no paragraph. And that might be wrong. I was just shocked to see the length of this.
There is no right and there is no wrong.
Right.
It is all about opinion. And I have been given feedback from some people that says maybe it's too thorough. I have worked at this company for 22 years. I average 18 months of position for 22 years. I have a lot to talk about. So I can't tell if people really wanted me out or people really wanted me in, but in either case, 18 months of position says, I want to be able to tell you the things that I've been able to do. Are there opportunities to batch some things together? So back to the points where you have done some things from when you were 19 years old, you've been in the force for 30 plus years, you might be able to batch some other things that say additional work experience, and you can include secretarial work, organizational, administrative, those types of things might be included in there. So there might be an opportunity to batch. But the reason why I've separated them is because the story that I'm trying to tell on my resume is that I have a background in working with people. I have a background in working with processes. I have a background in working with procedures, working with technology, working with administrative. I've dealt in phone centers where I've done inward calling, I've done outward calling, I've done analytics, I've done reporting. And all of that I want to come out a little bit separately. So I don't want to batch that stuff together because it shows that I am more of a generalist. I mean, there's a path, you have to make a decision. One of the hardest questions that was ever asked of me from one of my managers was, do you want to be a specialist or do you want to be a generalist? And what he meant by that was, as a generalist, I had a jack-of-all-trades mentality. I'm curious, I can go in and clean up problems in a lot of different areas, and I don't necessarily need the subject matter expertise. But I have knowledge that I can bring from other areas into the new areas. As a specialist, it means that I'm an accountant on day one, and at the end of my career, I'm still an accountant. And that's okay too. Or finance, or whatever that specialty might be. In the fraud area or in the risk area, you find a lot of people that are subject matter experts. And it doesn't mean that I don't have any knowledge or expertise in those fields. It means that there are some people that can get you so far deep into the detail. So my resume is coming across more as a generalist, and that's how I want it to be. I can reformulate it into a subject matter expert or a specialist if I need to, and then I can actually make it into a banking-related specialist, for example, if I had to. But I'm keeping it intentionally as a generalist position. However, it's very valid feedback, and that's not new feedback that I've had, but it's a conscious decision to do that. Now, I use the paragraphs. And the reason why I use the paragraphs is I can put some more information in that's meaty, that you can read, that can get your attention. The one reason I don't use bullets is because it's a waste of space. And the reason I say that is, if you use several bullets to explain your background, you're leaving all the empty space towards the end of that sentence to the right. And you're losing that valuable space. So you do want to keep it clear and concise. So I'm hoping that you're thinking my resume is thorough, but still clear and concise. I'll leave that up to your opinion. But when it comes to writing bullets, yes, it's clear, yes, it's concise, but it's also a waste of space to the right. I actually do a blend that I use fragmented sentences that could be put in bullets, but I put it in a paragraph form. Now, that is a style. It's not right. It's not wrong. But what I am is consistent when I do that, is I'm consistent throughout the entire document by doing that.
And just as a follow-up for that, just because I don't read resumes that often, if you had 10 resumes, how many of them would be 3 pages, 2 pages, 1 page? Like, what's that kind of flow of it?
3 would be 1 page, 3 would be 2, and 3.13 would be 3. I mean, it varies. It really, truly varies. And I wouldn't have 3 pages unless I had 22 years worth of banking experience behind me. I mean, this thing has evolved over the years. I mean, one of the toughest decisions I ever made was moving from 2 pages to 3. It was a conscious decision on when do I make the break. You know, at some point I'm cutting out all this stuff, but then I figured out I'm cutting out stuff that tells the story of who I am professionally, who I am personally, my person as a whole. My story started to get fragmented itself, and that's when I decided to move on to 3 pages. But I had several other positions. I've had 4 jobs in 4 years. Same company, obviously. But I've had 4 jobs in 4 years, and that's, I'm hoping, is a good thing of looking at all this experience I've picked up. I now understand governance. I understand fraud. I understand risk. I understand all of these things. How to manage an incentive plan. All of these things come out in the last 4 years. So now I have 4 completely unrelated jobs that forced it into a 3rd page. I call it forced it into a 3rd page. Pushed it into a 3rd page. So I'm not worried about counting pages. I'm worried about if somebody is reading this, or they get to page 2, and just fall asleep. And if that's the case, I have to rewrite this thing. You want to be able to keep reading of, wow, you've done this, you want to keep doing this. I have a model when it comes to writing in my pseudo-paragraph form. And that model is 3 things you want to include in it. The first is the job description. In 1 sentence or less, put in the job description. Now, if you've had multiple roles, and I know you brought up and said, I've worked at this company for 12 years, I don't want it batched in one place saying I've been doing the same job for 12 years. I want you to talk about increases in job responsibility that you've had. I want things of how the job has changed over the time. If you went from credit card collections to home loans collections, I want that separation in there because it's important. Because it shows your flexibility, it shows your ability to adapt, it shows your job knowledge has been broadened. I want a job description that says that. What happens though is most people stop. You are just regurgitating what everyone else is telling me. If your resume says, I collected past due accounts, and there's 15 resumes sitting on my desk, and all 15 say I collected in one version or another past due accounts, you've done nothing to differentiate yourself. But yet, that's where most of us stop. And they just regurgitate their job responsibilities. You haven't told me anything about you. I want to know about you, but I need to know what you were doing, which is where the job description might come. But now I want to know about you. Give me something that's going to catch my attention. Not misrepresenting yourself on a resume, but something that is going to be eye-popping, powerful, is going to catch my eye. So some of the things that were out there might be a portfolio. I collect, on an average month, $5 million worth of past due mortgage loans. I'm just throwing numbers against the wall. But $5 million says, gee, you must be responsible for someone to give you that many accounts. You want to be able for it to grab your attention. If you're in a leadership role, have managed up to 20 people, or was on a project team that I led of as many as 40 people. Something that's going to catch my attention, a number, most of the time or a lot of the time, will be able to do that for you, that you can give a context that says, wow, let me keep reading. The third thing that I put on there is a key accomplishment. So on a lot of resumes, you'll see a section dedicated to key accomplishments. My personal opinion is I like to take those accomplishments and I like to spread them out throughout the resume. Because if I have a list of all my accomplishments and I only have 3, 4, 5, or even I've seen 10, as the reader of this, a lot of things are going through my mind. And some of those questions are, well, once I get to the 5th accomplishment, is that it? How much of this is you filling up your resume? And if you're telling your story all at once of, here's everything I've done for my accomplishments, and the rest is just stuff on my resume, your story's becoming a little bit disjointed, in my personal opinion. So I like to spread out my accomplishments in there. It doesn't mean I'm going to give you a list of 7, 8, or 9 in every one of my job responsibilities, but I'm going to find something that was a key accomplishment to me. And it may not necessarily have to be tied directly into the job itself. Maybe you were given a special project on people retention. Maybe a lot of people on your team were calling out sick, and so they said, go ahead and see what you can do to help to ensure that people are coming to work on time. Or maybe you were asked to help build a report because you had some type of expertise in Excel. Doesn't necessarily directly align to the job you're doing right now, but that's a key accomplishment. If you achieved incentive 12 out of 12 months or 11 out of 12 months, or you were a consistent top performer and you were named the all-star on your team 3 consecutive years, that should be on there. Now, if you were to say I was selected all-star, you haven't told me anything yet, because I don't know what all-star is. But if you put in parentheses within the top 1% of my organization, or was considered achieved incentive at least 9 out of 12 months, and you're defining what all-star is, make sure that there's context behind the language that you're using. I saw there was another hand up.
Would you suggest putting the accomplishments with the dates that these accomplishments happened, or just?
If you are using a bulleted format, I typically just put the year for the accomplishment, because now you're just defining the accomplishment itself. You don't need to have continuity with an accomplishment like you would with jobs and gaps. So you may put parentheses with the year, or if it's within the job description. If it's in your job description and you say, I've been doing this job for the last 3 years, so from January 2010 to May 2012, I would just put it in there without the date, because the date's already self-explanatory.
You mentioned earlier that it's fine to have experiences on the resume that are paid and unpaid. When you use a chronological format, so they're all mixed in together, volunteer and actual jobs that you were paid for. So it could have a Bank of America job that you were paid for, and then some organization that you volunteered at. How do you just keep that consistent and just say like volunteered there instead of worked there? And when you title that mix of bullets or section, can you still consider it professional history?
I would consider anything that has made you who you are as a professional is professional experience. I would just tell you to be consistent with how you define your volunteer time. It's not relevant whether you're paid or not for you. It's relevant whether it is important to you. It's relevant whether it can help to define who you are and tell your story and help you potentially in the next jobs that you have. So as a volunteer for the Special Olympics, if that helps you because you have to be patient, you have to learn how to deal with people, you have to learn to organize, those are strengths that can help you in any job that's out there. Then just make sure that you put it wherever you think it would fit. If you've been doing it for a long period of time, and it really is in your eyes a second job, even though you're not paid for it, and you invest a ton of time each week or each month, go ahead and put that. I have some periodic stuff that I do volunteer-wise or extracurricular that I've decided I want to batch all of that together, and I actually went in with bullets in that section, but I was consistent in my approach on, here's my volunteer and extracurricular activity, so you get a feeling of what I do outside of work. So it gives you a feeling of, here's my inside work stuff, here's my outside work stuff. That worked well for my story, but if your volunteer activity is very intense, I would go ahead and put it. I wouldn't even necessarily put that, hey, it's a place where I volunteer, unless you want that to come out very clearly. It's that you volunteered your time there because that's part of the messaging you want behind it. I wouldn't necessarily worry about whether you're paid or not versus what skills are you possessing or what accomplishments have you had while you've been there. Like with a golf tournament, I am a very bad golfer, but was really put to a test with the golf tournament where they said go off and raise $30,000. Okay. But so I've included that on there that I was able to, I did it 2 years in a row, and it was very taxing. That was several years ago. But still something that's very meaningful to me. I volunteer for it. I was able to balance it with the job that I've had out there, and I didn't bring in $35,000, but I organized a team that was able to bring in $35,000, and hopefully in an interview or the resume tells that story that's out there that will tell you that I can help organize, I can build teams, we can have a lofty goal and achieve it. Those are some of the stories that you want to come out when you build it that way.
I know that we did touch on this a little bit, but where there's a lot of tenured people here, so if I've been with the bank for 12 years and I am applying for, say, another bank job, would I even need to put like the retail experience before that? Does it look good so they know, oh, well, look, you can work one-on-one with people too, or does it really matter because it was over 12 years ago, or what would you think on that?
When you say retail, are you talking banking center?
No, I work like retail, like at the mall, retail, like.
Oh, okay,
that
you're
kind of
talking
thing. Do I put that
See,
in
language
so,
barriers.
sorry, so they know that I've actually done other things outside of the bank, or does it look better if, you know, I've been here forever, just do that one thing?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I'll start with my best friend. One of my best friends, who I've known for 20 plus years, hands me his resume after being out of work for 2 years. And I said, let me take a look. And I said, excuse me, you were in the military reserves for at least 15 years? And he said, yeah, I know. I said, it's not on your resume. He said, yeah, I know, but it's not really relevant to what I'm doing. And I said, are you crazy? Military reserves, once a weekend, every month, commitment. Committed to this country. Bravery, leadership. I mean, I could sit here and go on and on about this little thing called the military, which really isn't a little thing. And yet he chose not to put it on his resume. It's the same type of thing with retail is, listen, is it who you are? Did it make you successful? Is it part of the stepping stones of the story that you're doing? I wouldn't consider my 3 weeks in a bookstore being that valuable. But I would say if you worked at a retail store and you learned how to overcome objections, you learned how to sell, you learned how to negotiate, you learned how to deal with irate customers. You know how to do it face-to-face. Absolutely, that's a piece of who you are. And actually it says you're well-rounded. I can do it on the phone. I can do it in person.
I didn't know if you were looking at it, would you think, well, that was 12 years ago? You wouldn't think that, you'd still think that that was... And obviously it is telling my story, you're right, it does make me who I am, so it doesn't matter how far it goes back then. Really.
You should take the dates, and they are meaningful only if you give them meaning. There are things on there from 22 years ago when I first started collections. Now, is it less detailed? There's only a sentence or two dedicated to it? Sure, but you need to know I started on the phone, so I can relate to people who are on the phone. So if I go to another bank and you ask me to lead the efforts of people on the phone, I know what they're thinking. I've been there. I want people to absolutely see that.
I noticed you put your year when you graduated from college, and I've heard some things that you shouldn't put your year because they can discriminate against you. Like, oh, well, you just graduated college, you're 22 years old, or oh, you graduated in 1970, you're ancient.
Yeah, when I get a little older,
I'm a little further.
when I get a little older, I'm going to take it off. But I mean, you have to really, well, first of all,
That's not my perspective.
70s is not
I'm 44 years old right now. When I hit 45, it's all over. Listen, I personally don't care what my age is, and I really am. I really don't care about the age. I don't. I want to apply for companies that I trust will not discriminate. So I go in with a little bit more of a trusting feeling. However, if you feel that if you're put up against all equal candidates and you think by having a date next to it can potentially swing a decision to even bring you in for an interview, don't put it on there. If you feel a little unease, take it off. I'm very comfortable with that because I'm hoping it shows the experience level that I have with it. But I don't think, I mean, now that you bring it up, I don't even think it's that relevant or important. But I like to, I want to make sure that people understood that I did graduate. But I mean, it's a great point, and it's a great perspective. It is just that. It's a perspective.
But then if you don't put a year,
then you're
they think you
potentially
just got
creating
out of
another
college
question.
yesterday, and what, you know, maybe that's not what they're looking for. Maybe they're looking for somebody with more background. So it's kind of like,
Or maybe.
You have to flip the coin.
Yeah.
And
Now she's made me worried about putting 1985.
I didn't put it.
It's a question you have to resolve for yourself.
It actually
And you're going to get opinions from a lot of people. I want to make sure when all's said and done, you're comfortable with your resume. Not comfortable with 10 other people's opinions on your resume, but you have to resolve this. I do this with my Toastmaster speeches all the time. I go in, it gets seen by hundreds of people, and people give me feedback left and right, but at the end of the day, I'm the ultimate decision on whether I make that change or not. You have to be comfortable in your own shoes to be able to do it. It's your story, not theirs. However, I value other people's opinions. I want you to comb through my resume, and feel free to send me any resume feedback, and I mean that. I absolutely mean it. If you see any, send it back to me. Typos, send it to me. Trust me, it's only going to make my resume stronger, and I'll take it all with a grain of salt, and I'll make a decision on whether I want to include it or not. That's all that I can ask, and that's all that I can do on the resume. But make sure that every decision you make on this resume is a conscious decision. That you are doing it intentionally, that you know there is a reason and method to your madness as to why you're doing it. And we have time for one more question. I know your hand is up.
Yeah, I was just wondering, so for past old work experience that you think is relevant, what if you don't remember the dates? Do we just kind of guess? Is that fine? Or do we... Well, I don't remember exactly.
Yeah, I
what
know, I don't remember. I mean, it's been a long time.
I will tell you that the question was, you don't remember dates. I will tell you, can you put it into some type of context of, let's see, I was 16, and you can, something that's not going to come back and bite you. Something that's not so relevant as, I mean, the most recent person in the news who was just fired from their job because they said that they were an intern at this place and they really weren't. Or they lied about the responsibilities they had when they were an intern during that time. That's where you're taking in a relevant fact and you're twisting it. If you think sometime, maybe you don't remember the months, and maybe the months aren't relevant in this particular case for something that you did back in 1990, then you say 1990, or you say work experience prior to, and then you just have it that general, and then you can just put some things and batch it all together. Because there are some certain pieces that are out there that make you who you are, and you don't want to include, you don't have to include every single thing that's out there, but then you say, well, if I don't include everything, am I creating a gap for myself? Maybe you just batch those older things up that explain what the skills are that you really want to include on there. So maybe you have negotiation skills, sales skills, finance skills, whatever it is that can be encompassed or included